Okay, and we're back. So, advantages of commercialization in sport. Right, there's different elements to affect commercialization in sport, and they have an effect on the whole spectrum of what sport is. So, the sport itself, the spectators watching it, the players, the sponsors that are involved. 'Cause obviously, a lot of the commercialization comes from sponsorships, and then that then promotes commercialization, etc., etc. So, let's have a look at this table together, and we're going to come up with a few ideas. I'm going to try not to give you all the ideas and all the answers so you can have a bit to go on your own, but without that discussion, it's quite difficult. So I'm going to give you a few hints and tips, and then you can go away and do it yourself. So, advantages of commercialization in sport. Let's think about the sponsor. So, you need to think about why would a sponsor want to invest in a sport? It's quite easy. It just gives image, doesn't it? It gives a perspective of that sport and that sponsor, but it's also got to make sure that the image is a good image for the sponsorship. Otherwise, if it's a negative image, that can have a negative impact on their commercialization, but we'll go on to the negatives after. What about the sports themselves? Well, money. They're going to get loads and loads of money to pump into those grassroots elements. You know, FIFA, with all the sponsorships that FIFA get, not only are they putting it into like the high-end sport, the Premier League and blah, 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 they're also putting it into those lower level. Without pupils learning sport in PE lessons, in little clubs when they're like 6 years old, if you don't have that interest and that engagement, you're then not going to have players for the future. So it's really important to build from the bottom upwards. So spending money for that grassroots, that bottom level of that sport is massively important for a sport in itself. Having said that, if more money is going into that sport, more participation because there's more people aware of it, more people are wanting to perform into it, etc., etc. So you can come up with a few more ideas for that one. It's quite a simple one. The player and the performer. Well, if the player and the performer are having more money, then they have more chances to become rich and famous, or to, you know, publicize themselves as a performer and be a role model, etc., etc. What else can they do? They might actually take the form, if they're getting more sponsorship and more money, they might then branch off. Obviously, the life of an athlete can be quite short, obviously, depending on the type of sport. For example, American football has quite a short lifespan, if you like, for a career because of the nature of the sport. Some sports can go on for years, and you can perform for years and years and years. However, once you're finished performing, what do you do then? So if you, whilst you are performing and whilst you're a sports star, getting your name out into the media, getting the money, getting the commercialization from it, that'll then allow you to adapt your career in the future, perhaps, because your name's kind of like already out there. So I think David Beckham, he's got his own clothing brand. He has been models for, you name it, he's done it, from aftershaves to clothing to everything, hasn't he? So, but his life started out as a footballer. He got his name out there through commercialization, through sponsorships, etc., etc., and he became so massive that he now basically lives off a career which happened years ago. So, pros and cons. As a spectator, okay, well, if there's more money going into sport's only going to become better, it's only going to become bigger, there's going to be new technologies introduced, so there's going to be more spectators, more opportunities to watch live sport because it's out there more. Some of the concepts within sport may be changed. So like we talk about, you know, if we're talking about rugby, like touchline technology, you know, the umpires, like it creates suspense for the spectators. If there's money going into it, they can then introduce new technologies like that to make it more interesting for the spectator. So there's many advantages of commercialization for sport. So again, go away, have a research, have a look at different sports of your interest and see how maybe those sports have commercialized over the years and got different and got better. Moving on now to disadvantages. There are many disadvantages that we can talk about. So again, let's start with a sponsor. If you think about it, for example, you're a sponsor, okay, you've got loads of money and you pump loads of money into one performer, perhaps. Maybe you can go away and think about, there's loads of performers that this example has happened to. Maybe can you go away and research a couple yourself? Now, for example, you have given this performer loads of money because you want to get your brand out there, and that performer is quite a well-known performer. That performer then gets caught cheating by using drugs, for example, a PED, performance-enhancing drug. How does that look for that sponsor? Have a little think. Okay, then moving on to the sport. Some sports have changed their rules in order to look better for the commercializer and for that sponsor and for the spectator. So is that maybe that has a good impact on that sport for the change to happen, or maybe it doesn't? Can you research any sports that have changed due to commercialization, change their rules? Have a little look. Sometimes, because commercialization has become so big, there's so much money going into it, it actually takes away from the live performance. So less people are going to the games because they've got access to it on the TV. For example, people Sky buying the rights to the Premier League and showing it only on Sky. That might be cheaper for a person to buy into Sky to watch all the games and actually go into all the games themselves. That can have a negative impact on the sport. Obviously unhealthy sponsorships and things like that, making a bad image for the sport if like a negative sponsor buys into it. Sometimes the sports just don't have a choice. They just have to kind of go along with it because they need to get the money from somewhere, for example. Player and performer. So it kind of takes away from you being an athlete, because you become an athlete because you're talented at doing a sport or performing a sport. But then as soon as you have commercialization on top of that and you are sponsored by someone, you almost become like a commodity rather than an athlete. So you're used because you're good at an athlete, but then it kind of takes away from what you're actually there for, which is performing the sport, which can have a negative impact on the performer's mental health and how they actually perform in the sport in general, or they might quit a sport sooner because there's no need to carry on, and it kind of just takes away from the whole idea of being an athlete. Sometimes commercialization, so much money gets pumped into these top athletes because they're the people that are being watched. They're the people that are going to make the money. That people lower down the food chain, so those amateurs aren't getting the funding, aren't getting the sponsorship that actually they need for it to progress into that professional level. So that can have an impact on a performer lower down, perhaps. And spectators, oh gosh. So if you think about it, if you've got loads of sponsorships going into a sport, there then has to be breaks to pay for the adverts. So as a spectator, you're not buying into watching the sport, you're also buying into watching all the adverts and all the promotions and all the sponsorship that goes along with it, which kind of then takes away again from the whole idea of the sport itself. Again, things like, because it's cheaper to watch it on the TV, they've got to make more money somehow, so they increase the ticket prices. So then that also then discourages people from watching it live on the TV. Again, taking away from the whole nature of sport and the atmosphere of going to watch sport. So have a think of some other ideas that maybe you can think of for that. Moving on then, there are just now a few exam style questions. Again, for you to tackle now, guys, it's really important. Keep up with that exam style practice. Even if you don't need it this year because of everything that's going on, you are going to need it in your A-levels, and it's really, really important to keep that up. So keep cracking. The next few really go into that, and then I'm going to make another video after we've done this, probably next week, so you've got a lot to be going off now, which will be finishing off this booklet starting from page 16, and actually there's not that much left. We've nearly done it. So there are actually just a lot of questions now looking at it. So that'll then finish off this booklet. So next week I'll be able to start giving you a tutorial on the next and the last booklet, which is, let me just double check, I can't remember off the top of my head, 3.3. It is ethical and socio-cultural issues in physical activity and sport, which is a really small topic. It'll take us probably one tutorial for me to get through all of it, speaking with you. So I'll do that one for you next week. Okay, if you've got any questions, as always, give me an email, send me a post on Teams, and you know where to find me for some answers. Okay, see you later, guys.